Welcome to Customer Focused Differentiation in a Highly Competitive Marketplace, Part 2, Module 1, Building and Leading a Customer Experience Differentiation Culture. I'm Aruni.
And I'm Scott.
Today we're going to talk about building and leading a customer experience differentiation culture. And when doing so, these are the elements that are extremely important in making sure you're set up for success. Leadership is essential. We'll give you insights and videos about leadership and some best practices in setting up a great leadership team. We'll talk about the importance of collecting data and forming the right insights for making proper decisions. We'll talk about the importance of customer communication, how you should go about designing the user experience at a very high level, as well as talking about how to empower your team. It's also important to align your KPIs with your strategy, building in feedback systems, and you want to make sure to get everyone involved. You want to hire and grow customer-centric employees, and that is an art as well that we will talk about. And in the end, always make sure to celebrate your successes, because that will give you the momentum to keep moving and continuously build a customer experience differentiated culture. So more on leadership. You as a leader want to make sure that you're modeling customer-centric behavior. As a CEO, the VP of any different department, not just the customer success department, even if you're in finance, even if you're in sales, you want to have a leadership team that's modeling customer-centric behavior. Understand that your employees are also your customers. They must be involved in this cultural shift. Set and communicate the strategic direction that you're moving to set up this customer experience differentiated environment, and be ruthless in defending and enforcing this culture. Shield your team from the political obstacles that will occur and arise during this process. Make sure you have a relentless focus on customers and the customer experience, everything and how they interact with your company. And here's a quote that we wanted to highlight. Putting the customer at the heart of the business means that every procedure, process, and system keeps the customer in mind.
And Rudy, I want to add that in my practice and in my time as a COO, one of those things you really need to do is to have that relentless focus on customers and customer experience. So have that relentless focus and iterate endlessly to get better at it all the time, because standing still is not going to work long term for your business.
Thanks, Scott. It's very important.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the value of early wins, and we're going to look at a customer experience transformation video from McKinsey.
There's different ways companies identify or understand they need customer experience. Some come to it over time. They realize they want to improve one channel, one function, and then over time they realize they actually need to improve things more holistically. And so they step back and they start changing things across functions. In other instances, though, companies have a major issue, a product recall, a botched launch, an outage, things like that. And then that highlights that there's a bunch of bigger issues. And so then they step back and they take a broader approach. So there could be multiple ways into this. We have also seen companies come at this as, I want to be like Apple, Amazon, noted customer leaders across industries, because they see how successful those companies are, and then they look at their own company and like, we don't treat customers that well. We aspire to do more. And so they come at it more from an aspirational perspective. The reason that companies need to do something differently is because they're running out of places to grow. They're running out of places to drive earnings. One of the best places to do that is you look at your own customer base and say, how do I deepen my relationship with those customers so they stay with me longer, and ultimately over time they buy more from you. The really great companies at customer experience find not only that they keep their customers longer, but those customers become fans and start to pull in other customers, so you build over time. That's ultimately what it takes. Because I think many companies are running out of the more traditional ways to grow earnings, whether it is squeezing costs, raising prices. You can do those only so far without having a highly satisfied customer base. As we think about how to approach customer experience and how to change it, the first place you need to start is understanding what matters to which customers. Without a clear view of what matters, and importantly what doesn't matter, it's hard to actually make any changes. And there's almost always insights that come out of that around things you can stop doing as much as things you should be doing. That's the place to start. Once you've got a view of what matters to customers, you then need to, as quickly as possible, move to action. So this is taking an area of particular pain, taking an area with a big opportunity, and doing something to change that experience as quickly as you can. We find this is critically important both to show a change to customers and employees. With customer experience, we see if you don't see value near term, you'll never get to the long term. Again, it's one of the biggest failure points we see in customer experience programs. People are looking for retention benefits that may be 12, 18, 24 months down the road. The most impactful programs find ways to deliver value very near term. So whether it's reducing calls that come in by eliminating issues, whether it's streamlining a particular interaction like onboarding, you've got to find those early actions that take costs out and improve the customer experience very early on. In order to get traction on customer experience, you should aim for traction within the first year of a program. In order to deliver fundamental change, and I'm talking about rewiring a company and becoming a customer experience leader, for most companies this will be a 2 to 3 to 4 year journey. The reason it takes so long is you have to work across functions, quite frequently across geographies, quite frequently across different customer segments, and it just takes a while. You need to start in some place to show impact quickly. It just takes a while to scale. What I can say though is once you've actually rewired the company around the customer, you've got a competitive differentiator that others will find hard to match. We see a number of companies undergoing broad transformations around customer experience. One of the most important parts or elements early on in that journey is understanding and aligning the executive leadership team to have real conviction about undergoing a transformation. In terms of the parts and pieces that come together for an end-to-end transformation, we see a number of elements. First is a very clear view of what matters to customers. So marketing insights plays a real role in creating that roadmap for people. There's an element of frontline transformation, frontline engagement, to make sure your frontline is engaged, satisfied, and working differently than they did before. There's usually a technology component for creating digital experiences, whether it's early prototypes or end-to-end experiences, and really showing how you can make those happen quickly. There's also almost always an organizational or HR element where you've got to ultimately change the culture of the place. And so working very closely with your HR organization is important. When you take these 4 elements together, it's ultimately the whole company that has to change. So you've got to create a real cross-functional approach to making this change. As you think about sequencing, you've got to start in one part of the company to show what's possible. Again, it can be one function, it can be one geography, it can be one business unit. Start somewhere. Once you've got that proof case, you can do literally anything, because then you've got multiple different ways you can scale across functions, across geographies. These are the sorts of elements that come together in successful transformations.
So that video is pretty fantastic. It's got a whole bunch of information, but I think one of the key takeaways from it is making sure that you get those short-term wins, not only for your customers on the outside, but for that inertia within your company, and it is critical to get those. So let's go ahead and head to the next slide. Okay, we're going to move on to the next video here. This is a video on the 5 competencies of leadership from Jeannie Bliss, and she's probably the top customer experience or chief customer officer consultant. Pretty phenomenal lady. So we'll go ahead and start this video.
So what happens inside of this work is that often customer experience work is very reactionary. We sync to the cycle of the survey results. I try to move them past that and actually embed 5 competencies that create an engine for driving growth. First of all, creating a new language set for the leadership team, and most importantly, a new definition of success, which is what I call customers as assets. And we build a company's version of that customer asset metric. We also change leadership's behavior so that they start their meetings asking and talking about the outcome of the work that they did. What that does is it moves this work immediately from something that people is nice to have to a growth strategy that is necessary. The next thing that we do is we align around experience. Instead of driving the work down the silos, which is normally in any corporate world, if you sit down at a leadership's meeting, they'll go around the room and they'll say, marketing, operations, sales, what did you do? Instead, what we start with is, what's the onboarding experience? What's the new product experience? What's the purchase experience? And what we do is we shift how a company brings a product to market, how a company drives growth, what their metrics are before they might send something to the field. And what that does is it leaves embedded behaviors and a change in how the company does the business. The third competency that we focus on is building a customer listening path. This means aggregating multiple sources of customer feedback and listening, not just from surveys, going through your social media, going through your complaints and trending it, and mapping it to the journey. What happens in a lot of places, and luckily we're seeing this changing, is that survey results will come out and they're by survey question rather than by stage of the customer experience. The fourth competency that we embed is proactive experience reliability and innovation. And what we know is that's critical for social media. If you don't have an experience a customer can't repeat, then you're not going to earn the right to their story. You're not going to earn that recommendation. But beyond that, you need to have a methodology for innovating experiences. And what we try to do is embed a customer experience design methodology that's as rigorous as product development. And then finally, the last thing is, as a leadership team, how do you make decisions? How do you hire people? How do you get rid of stupid rules that get in the way of your employees doing the right thing? And as a leadership team, are you all talking about the same thing? Are you centered? And do you choose to grow in a deliberate way? By embedding those 5 competencies, we change the arc of how a leadership team works together, and we change how they grow.
Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk about collecting data and using it as insight for decision making. And we have a whole bunch of types of data listed here: user and usability testing, A/B testing. You know, we have big data. It's a very big term right now, combining all the data into one spot. There's prototyping, surveying, listening, point of sale data, and then of course customer experience journey mapping. But really the important point here is to match the data with the decision-making help and insight that you need. So not to collect so much data that it's not actionable, but to collect the right data and a limited amount of it so that you're able to make good decisions from it. And that's it.
Thanks, Scott. So I'm continuing on collecting data and insights for decision making. We have a video we want to share where he'll talk more about that process.
Well, as soon as Scott can get the video started.
Yes.
And this goes to one of the fundamental problems of data analysis, right? Data mining, data analysis, we find patterns. And then people tell you, no, you got to go to insights. Instead of patterns, create insights. And then they tell you, oh no, insight's not enough. It's got to be actionable insight. Somebody's got to act on it. And then the common thinking around that is, well, the way to get to actionable insight is to make sure that you're tied in with the business, because they'll understand and they'll be able to act on it, which is true. You know, that point is absolutely true. The business is the tip of the spear there. But I'm going to relate an anecdote and tell you that there's actually an extra mile that you've got to go to before you can act, before an insight becomes actionable. So I go back to my first gig at IBM when I was a researcher. I had created this program that ended up being used by 25 teams of the National Basketball Association. And in fact, when I was here in San Francisco, in '96, I think it was, the Seattle Supersonics were playing the Chicago Bulls in the finals, and they were down 2-0. And the program essentially recommended that they start a player called Brikowski. And the guy was called Brikowski. His shot was like a brick. He was a backup guy. He was not a good player. But the program recommended they start him. Now imagine that discussion with the coach, right? That's the business. I'm tied into the business. Imagine that discussion where we're telling the coach, you got to start this guy. And he's going to say, I don't think so. You know, I'm down 2 games. You want me to start this guy? You know, it can basically go south on me very quickly, and then What do I tell people? I'll get fired. So if you think more deeply about that, what's at play there is that the coach doesn't believe it's going to create value. He thinks it could destroy value. So you don't really know. So you've come up with this phenomenal analysis, you've presented the pattern, and they can't really make a decision on it. So it's not actionable, right? And even though it's directly to the coach who's there to act on it. And the way we resolved that was we actually took them to the video clips as to what happened when they did play Brakowski in those two games. And what they ended up finding out, looking at the video, was that he got under the skin of a player called Dennis Rodman, who everybody knows. And so Rodman essentially ended fouling out of the game, doing things like that. Even though whenever he was matched up with Brakowski, he obviously took Brakowski apart, but he just got under his skin. Then they went ahead and started him, right? So they went ahead and started him, and they had tremendous success with that. But my main point was that video is the context around that. Not in the data, coach can look at it, it comes back to that kind of data. Now, this kind of data is what we call unstructured data. It primarily makes for the bulk of the data that surrounds us. Video, images, photo, voice, text, all unstructured data. For the most part, untapped, unused in enterprises in a decision-making way. Usually just used for transactional stuff. Otherwise, it's just there lying as a record. But that's fundamental to creating context around these patterns.
Okay.
And now that we've discussed the importance of leadership and the importance of collecting the right data and gathering the right insights using the unstructured data as well as the actual data to make decisions, I want to talk about customer communication. One of the key things in building a customer experience differentiated environment is to make sure that the communication path to your customer is clear. You want to be able to interact genuinely and honestly. You want to listen and hear what your customers are saying. You want to treat them like valued partners. Over here, there's a quote on this slide, and it says, "The single best problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." We've all been in situations where we think we've communicated something, and it turns out the person on the other end didn't really understand us. So that's why it's extremely important to build trust. When you have trust in a relationship, your customer will give you a little bit of time to clarify yourself. And if you're alerting customers to large changes in advance, they know that you have their best interests in mind.
And Rudy, I just want to inject something here. I have a client that I'm working with right now, and very large client, multi-billion-dollar company, and they think they listen to customers, and they did about 5 or 6 years ago. But somewhere along the way, it got normal, it got regular, and all of a sudden they're not really listening to their customers, and so their customer experience isn't what they thought it was. So I just wanted to point that out, that it is really important to truly listen to your customers and hear what they're saying.
Yeah, totally agree, Scott. And part of that listening here and hearing is being transparent. You really want to be open with your communications. Even when there's some bad news, you want to be able to communicate to that customer so that they know you have their back. You want to actively solicit their feedback, get it from them. Know that they can trust you with giving you the good, bad, and the ugly information so that you can improve your product, the way you work with them. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff that happens in the personal and work persona.
Yeah,
Scott, you can explain that a little bit more?
It's really about teaching your team how to react with their own personality, to where their personality and their personal and your work personas blend, so that you're letting them give a little bit of themselves to a customer, and that helps build trust with your customer relationships.
Okay, yeah, and so I work with many large customers and where I'm working today, and I enjoy having conversations with them. I want to know what's going on with them personally, professionally, what are the challenges that they're facing internally, and that's something that motivates me. And we're going to talk about hiring the team, the customer focused team. Like to me, that's really important to understand just not just the individual, but what the team environment that they're working in. You also want to respond to feedback timely. There's nothing more frustrating than if a customer says, this sucks or this is great, and you can acknowledge that. You go back into your team and say, hey, we heard you. Here's how we're planning to address it, or here's why we can't address it at the moment.
Exactly.
And that means a lot to a customer because otherwise they feel like any feedback they're giving is going into a black hole. And then the worst thing that can happen is they quit giving you feedback. And that could be, predetermining a kiss of death when your customers don't care enough about your success to give you that feedback. So I always find it very valuable when a customer takes time to give me product feedback or support feedback or any other information that will help their experience be better with our products and services so they'll continue working with us. Follow through on your word. This is critical. When you talk to anybody, just in life in general, I mean, if you're working with a customer, you're working with anybody in your team, if you say, hey, I'm going to check in on this, get back to them. And something that I do personally is I keep action items. I look through, what I've said I'm going to follow through the customer. And then within time, I get back to them and say, hey, I told you I was going to do this, and here's what I found out. And that really helps, again, build that environment and that trust with that customer. And internally, your customers internally, and your customers externally. And one last thing, this is important. In the digital era, online and phone is a great way to interact with their customers, but there's nothing that really replaces a face-to-face interaction. Getting in front of your customers, they will tell you so much more, and you can pick up on so many body language cues that you won't be able to pick up on a WebEx or phone.
Not to mention the relationship that you're able to build.
Yes.
So we're going to talk again. We've talked in past modules about the customer experience journey map. And of course, we have these 4 items here. I think the biggest importance of a customer experience journey map, besides that it's real feedback from a customer, is the ability to take that piece of paper, which is representative of your relationship, and be able to socialize it up and down your company. And that is so critical. I have a client and they went out and spent $1 million making a customer experience journey map that's 40 feet long. That's not actionable. That's not something you can walk around and socialize and show your C-suite and walk down and show your people on the floor. And that's the value of a customer experience journey map. So we've seen this a couple times, but I want to call your attention. Really, the purpose is to call out the big items that are important. In this customer experience journey map, we can see the emotions, and we can see it goes from benign to slightly happy to very unhappy. That's really important for this company to understand. And then we have the intensity, and then we follow up with the representative quotes, which really help to drive the company towards making a change. And that's what a customer experience journey map is for.
Thanks, Scott. So we've emphasized the importance of communication internally and externally with your customer, and the customer journey map is one tool. Now we're going to talk a little bit about designing the user experience, because this is how your customer interacts with you through the product. Setting your product right is important, but there's always things that you can learn along the way. So you want to start by knowing your user. How are they going to interact with your product? Is it going to be self-service? Are they going to need training? All of that is important to know up front, because this really helps the overall customer experience. If you understand that, that will help you put in processes and people to help your customer achieve the best result that they can achieve. You can use the methods and processes that we noted on the customer communication slide in order to get some of this information and understand how they're interacting with your product. Validate the experience constantly. Confirm your understanding with the customers. As a product management person, you can go out and build the greatest, wheel. But if your customers aren't interacting with it like you want them to, then you're not going to get the best, you're not going to achieve the best customer experience. Scott, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it's for user experience. There's great, amazing UX designers out there, and they're always looking at how to solve that pain. And I think, part of designing the user experience is you do need to know your user and validate this internal understanding of your customer. But also, when we talk about team, have a user experience designer in mind too, because that is really critical. You need someone that gets the experience and knows how to translate that customer pain into something for them.
Yeah, and as Scott said, there are complete firms and experts in this, and we're talking at a very high level. But you really want to get some of those experts involved when you're doing user interface and user experience work. And it's important as well, as we talked about, understanding with the customers, and a lot of those firms will create prototypes so they can interact and give chances for the customer to interact with the product before you go ahead and build the product.
And this is really part, as you're out in the world, it's really become, agile is really becoming dominant over waterfall. And I think this is part of building your product, that prototypes early and failing early and learning from those early prototypes is really going to be critical to building out your system or your product. And I'm going to go into this case study. Okay, so let's talk about testing early and often, and usability tests in general. And we're going to talk about a major Las Vegas casino, which was a customer not too long ago. And what they wanted was to redesign their web and booking experience because they were losing out to the Expedias of the world. And so despite major pushback from the inside, what we did was go out and get users to actually interact with early prototypes, even on paper, and then of course there's electronic clickable prototypes you can get later on. But we went through 3 iterations of this, and we were able to show to those internal management team members that here's what's wrong, and here's what's working, and here's how this works. And the bottom line was, with those usability studies and moving that management team, we were able to build a website that converted at 2.9x or 2.9x times greater than it had in the past. And the point is, usability tests work.
Thanks, Scott. And so now we have a really great video that talks about designing the user experience that we'll share with you.
User experience is the science and art of designing a product like a website or a software application so that it's easy to use, so that it fits the expectation that the user has for it, and so that it meets business goals. There's a whole methodology around designing a user experience, and sometimes people ask me, is it worth it to do all that work to design a user experience? So let's talk about the return on investment, or ROI, of doing user experience work. IEEE is a professional organization that puts out reports and does research for programmers, developers, and engineers, and they put out an article called Why Software Fails. Here's some interesting data from their article. They estimate that the amount of money that is spent worldwide in information technology is estimated at $1 trillion a year. The percent of projects that are abandoned because they are hopelessly inadequate is up to 15% of all projects. The percent of revenue that goes to the IT group is 5% of a company's total revenue, and up to 10% if it's a financial or telecommunications company. The amount of time that programmers spend on rework that is actually avoidable is 50% of their time. The cost of fixing an error after development is 100 times that of fixing an error before development of the project is completed. Of the top 12 reasons that projects fail, 3 of the top 12 are directly related to what we would call user experience or user-centered design work. And those 3 are badly defined requirements, poor communication among customers, developers, and users, and stakeholder politics. So the kind of work that user experience professionals do, stakeholder interviews, user research, user testing, user-centered design, these are all things that can fix at least 3 of those 12 reasons why software fails. You actually can calculate the savings or additional revenue or benefit that you get from improving the user experience of a product. So let's look at some examples to make this more concrete. First example I want to talk about is, let's say that you are a micro lending company. So these are often nonprofit organizations that look for donations from people, and then they take that money and they lend it out in very small loans to people around the world who need the money to run a small or home business in order to better their situation. So you have a website and people donate money at your website, but the searching and donating part of the interface at the website is confusing and hard to use. And you have estimated that 50 customers a day are actually abandoning before donating because of the poor user experience. So let's do some calculations. Each customer, let's say, donates an average of $50 over the course of a year. So you are losing $2,500 a day, or $912,500 a year. If you spend $50,000 to fix the user experience issues, and another $50,000, let's say, to rewrite the code based on those user experience improvements, we can estimate you're going to spend $100,000 improving the user experience. It will take you 40 days or a little over a month then to realize the investment, because you've got $912,500 a year that you could improve. So in a little over a month, you've recouped your investment. There are many measurements that would be meaningful. For example, conversion rate. That's the number or the percent increase of visitors to a website who either buy or donate, or it doesn't have to do with money. It might be they take the action you want them to take, like register at the website. Or you might be interested in the decrease in the number or percent of drop-off or abandonment. The decrease in the number of calls to the help desk. Or maybe by making a user experience improvement, you can reduce the amount of training that's required. For instance, if it's an internal software application. Maybe you want to increase the usage of a software application. Maybe you're looking to save user time, or maybe you want to save development time. Perhaps errors are what you are trying to reduce. Whatever measure you choose, calculating the return on investment is a way to show the value of doing user experience work. Here's one of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein. I think he said it best. Any intelligent fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. If you'd like your own copy of this drawing to download and print, go to humanfactors.com/ROIposter.as.
So that was a great video about the design experience and why it's so important to get that right up front, and how actually it's better off for you long term to make sure that you have the design right and the user experience done well. So now that we've sort of talked about the importance of leadership, talk about communication internally and externally, and the user experience, the design, I want to talk about empowering your team. To make sure that you can grow and build on a customer-focused differentiation culture that you've been working on, you want to communicate the why. Help your team see the vision and inspire them to be your champions of change. If your team doesn't understand why you're moving towards a customer-focused culture, then it'll be really hard to implement all the other things that we've talked about. You want to invest in each person's skill set. Make sure they have the right skills. Give them training and send them to conferences to help them learn and inspire them. Acknowledge and celebrate your team and individual successes. And give your team the space to innovate. We talked about earlier shielding them from non-productive politics. As you push forward this change through your organization, there will be people who doubt you and may not have full, clear knowledge of how to implement this change. So it's really important to continue educating and building knowledge within the company. Allow them to try things, make mistakes, be part of successes, and learn. That's the only way that you're going to continue to build trust and help them be parts of the solution to create this better customer-focused environment.
Can I also add, Ernie, is one of the things, give your team space to innovate, is you really need to work to unleash their creativity. And it's amazing what they'll produce for you. And that's the reason why companies like Google and Facebook, they reserve a percentage of their time just to allow them to do blue sky thinking. And I see it at a current client too, and it has an amazing effect on the team.
Thanks, Scott. And what's important too is give them the tools. There's great tools out there to help empower the customer experience, and make sure that you look into those tools and see what works best for you and your environment. That will take some iteration, get the people involved in selecting tools. We've talked about some of these tools in prior modules, Gainsight, Sapmetrics, Salesforce, anything that can help make the customer experience better and your employees' experience in serving those customers better, as well as the measurements. Make sure they're clear on the measurements. We call Net Promoter Score, customer satisfaction, etc. We've talked about that in the past.
So we're going to go ahead and do on empowering your team and the importance of it from Steve Jobs.
One of the keys to Apple is Apple's an incredibly collaborative company. And so, you know how many committees we have at Apple?
No,
0. We have no committees.
no committees.
We are organized like a startup. One person's in charge of iPhone OS software. One person's in charge of Mac hardware. One person's in charge of iPhone hardware engineering. Another person's in charge of worldwide marketing. Another person's in charge of operations. We're organized like a startup. We're the biggest startup on the planet. And we all meet for 3 hours once a week, and we talk about everything we're doing, the whole business. And there's tremendous teamwork at the top of the company, which filters down to tremendous teamwork throughout the company. And teamwork is dependent on trusting the other folks to come through with their part without watching them all the time, but trusting that they're going to come through with their parts. And that's what we do really well. And we're great at figuring out how to divide things up into these great teams that we have and all work on the same thing, touch bases frequently, and bring it all together into a product. We do that really well. And so what I do all day is meet with teams of people and work on ideas and solve problems to make new products, to make new marketing programs, whatever it is.
And are people willing to tell you you're wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, other than snarky journalists. I mean, people that work
Oh,
for
yeah. No, we have wonderful arguments.
you. And do you win them all? Or?
Oh, no, I wish I did. No, see, you can't. If you want to hire great people and have them stay working for you, you have to let them make a lot of decisions, and you have to be run by ideas, not hierarchy. The best ideas have to win.
So,
otherwise, good people don't stay.
but you must be more than a facilitator who runs meetings. You obviously contribute your own ideas.
I contribute ideas, sure. Well, why would I be there if I didn't?
Great video. So, sorry about that. I'm just trying to, there we go. Okay. So we want to talk next about aligning your KPIs with your strategy. So when you focus on customer differentiation, one thing that's really important is you have to relook at your KPIs, because you need KPIs that will incent the outcomes that you desire. And that means to take your KPIs and change them from what they were. As a leader, you want to focus them on getting your company to focus on the customer. And so you got to use those kind of metrics that incentivize and align that behavior with your strategy. And that may be now for you, maybe churn rate or NPS or customer sat or customer effort score. But the key is not to follow everybody else, but to put your own set of KPIs together that align that strategy. And honestly, over time, you're going to need to adjust them, because your company may change, or your customers may change, and you're going to have to change those KPIs to align with where your customers are at.
Thanks, Scott. So we want to next talk about building in feedback systems. So you've set all these things in place. So we've got your communication, you've got your KPIs, you've got your team, you're putting all these in place. So you want to figure out, how do you make sure you're getting information back into the system to iterate and adjust? As Scott mentioned earlier, it's going to be a continuous process while you're building a customer experienced differentiated environment, because your customers change and you change. We're all living in dynamic markets these days. So in order to set up feedback systems, find what works for you in your industry and market. Sometimes surveys work well, sometimes they don't. Your customers, it really depends on how they interact with you. Identified listening posts, you can do that through social media, you can do that through focus groups, conferences, etc. There's always different ways you can generate listening posts.
Yeah, and you just got to find the ones that work best for you. You know, for one company, it may be some areas, and for other companies, it may be other areas. Just make sure your listening posts are aligned with your mission and what you're trying to accomplish.
And keeping that in mind, here's some examples that you should consider. If you're in a business-to-business environment where you're selling directly to businesses, it's really important to schedule direct communication. Do some on-site visits. Have inner circles. You can do those online or in person. Sometimes we do conferences, user groups, things like that help bring your customers together to share information with you and get you feedback. If you're in a business-to-consumer environment, sometimes you can use usability studies and surveys. Sometimes those will annoy your customers. So you want to make sure that you have the right tool to get that information. You can get online user studies using usertesting.com as well.
Or services like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And another key is to get everyone involved, because what's really important here is, as you're driving a culture change, to create some momentum. And we talked about those early successes. So you got to get those early successes to create that early momentum, and then get everyone involved and give everyone credit for the work that they do.
Yes, and train them. As we talked about earlier, some people may be natural at this, and most often people need some training. They've come from different cultures, you've hired them from different places, and you want to make sure they're trained in your way, in the way that you feel that should be customer focused. And it can be different, and it can take time depending on the individual and the team. If you're training the sales department versus the marketing department versus HR, etc. So tell them why. Keep repeating why. As you know, there's always that, what they call the grapevine story. So you want to make sure that the story that comes through the grapevine is the right one and is not distorted. Engage both line and staff members in your quest. There's many departments that we've talked about that have to get involved. And here's some of the examples that may be called different things in your organization. And HR and finance, sometimes we found those can be the most difficult to change because they tend to be more far removed directly from the customer. So they require a bit more education. And we have a video here by McKinsey that will talk about how you can get everyone involved.
When you approach customer experience, I'm going to sound a bit cliche, but it's a transformation or part of one like no other. And what happens in that is you're bringing together functions and capabilities and ideas and competencies, frankly, across the entire spectrum. And the whole organization must necessarily line up against the actual customer. So it is the customer's experience. It's not ours. It's not our product or our idea or our process or whatever. It's the experience that we want to give to the customer. And I think part of what makes it so fundamental and requires kind of a visionary look is that it's a recognition that the experience, whatever industry we're in, whatever we do, but the experience is actually the product, right? So when we talk about vision, you'll often hear conversation about what actually is, everything from the corporate strategy to how we compete, to how we make money. But at some point it does come back to that end customer and a sense of purpose. What are we here to do? We're here to give them and to delight them and give them a great experience in what we need. You have to have a commitment to turn the whole thing into something completely different and be able to articulate that and communicate that in a way that really is compelling.
So if you think about trying to create great experience in an airport, it's a lot just to agree as a leadership team and a group of senior stakeholders that actually experience even matters. For example, to turn an airport into a place that people actually want to spend time, right? So as you turn that corner and then start to build some facts and some understanding of who these people are, then you're going to get the first level of things that we can do to build a better journey. And it might be as simple as, everybody's getting really lost when they come through our airport. And we need to work on wayfinding. We need signage that's more straightforward. It could be as, wonderfully straightforward as we've had recently with an airport where if I could just get my 18,000 employees to make eye contact and smile with the passenger who I'm now going to refer to in my mind as a guest, I win, right? If I did only that, I would move the needle on customer experience. And then that revelation, I think, triggers the next idea and so on, right? When an organization, I think, approaches the idea of greater customer experience, they may come at it from many different angles, but whatever that genesis is, I think the next set of questions get really interesting. I think there's a question around, all right, so what will this mean to us? How does this advantage us? What will this allow us to do competitively that we couldn't do? So I think there's a big question around where does that value come from and how are we going to get it? But at some point, hopefully it lands on, okay, now who are the customers? What segments? Which ones matter the most? And then which journeys or which interactions are really most important to us? And then it'll get into what actually happens on those journeys. And then where's the pain or where's the opportunity to do something very different? And I think those conversations start working their way through. And then there's this very obvious question of how do we really get all the kinds of people that are necessary together on one team to go after this? Because when you start to talk about, corporate strategy and journeys and different customer segments and pieces of operations, you suddenly realize you need everyone, right? You need the operators, you need the marketing people, you need finance, you definitely need HR, because HR hopefully and somewhere in here will raise their hand and say, the only way we can really do this is with employees that are inspired and motivated to do great work. And then someone will say, yeah, that's really logical, because if people come to work in a bad mood, there's no way they're going to be nice. I think it is a significant challenge to reorientate the company towards the consumer, towards the customer, and the experience that they're having. And as you go through this process, I think that's the hard part. The good part is you actually do have something to rally around, right? You actually have this customer, and as you go through this, you get to know them increasingly well. We know them, first perhaps we know them analytically. We do their demographics and we understand their volumes, and maybe we even think about their relative profitability to us. But then you actually also must necessarily start to understand them as humans and as people having an experience. And you start looking, and again, if you take the airport, you start looking at that family, and you understand that for them, for example, this trip is almost a capital purchase. It's such a big deal, and that maybe they don't travel very often, and that they're stressed, and you understand what's highest on their priority, which, is sometimes as a quick moving business traveler, it's a place to plug in or minimal hassle, but for them, it's actually a restroom, right? Or something very foundational. So I think that building that alignment and closeness to the customer as you get to know them, I think that actually brings the organization together, and it keeps them together, because you increasingly stop talking about yourselves and your processes and your own issues and the things you want to do, and you start thinking and learning more about this group of people here who actually do matter and who do create the alignment, and in fact define the only reason that we're all here.
Okay, in this last video, we're going to talk a little bit about what Arun and I talked about earlier, which is hiring and growing customer-centric employees.
Hi, this is Shep Hyken, customer service and experience expert. And on this video, I'm going to discuss 6 differences between customer-focused companies and operations-focused companies. Some companies really understand customer service. They know how to hire for it, train for it, and deliver it. Other companies claim to give customer service, but in reality, they're grounded in an operations mentality with rules and policies that allow for very little flexibility, preventing them from being anything more than just average or at best satisfactory. Here are a few observations of the differences between customer-focused companies versus operations-focused companies. Empowerment. A customer-focused company empowers employees to make decisions that are for the benefit of the customer. They have guidelines versus rules and take the approach that if it isn't illegal, immoral, won't cost the company money, although sometimes that's still okay, and it won't harm the company's reputation, then they should consider doing it and taking care of the customer. The operations-focused company requires managers' approval for anything that's outside of their policies or typical way of doing business. On hiring, a customer-focused company hires people who fit the culture, which means they have the personalities and core values that align with the company's vision and mission. Certain jobs may require skill, but skill alone won't get the applicant hired. An operations-focused company will hire for skill, filling a position with technical strengths. The applicant's personality may or may not fit the corporate culture. On training, a customer-focused company spends time and money training for soft skills, such as relationship building and customer service. The company recognizes that it takes both technical and soft skills to break away from being average. The operations-focused company spends most of their training dollars and time on technical skills and product knowledge. On leadership, the leaders of a customer-focused company set the vision and mission of the culture, and then they lead by example. The leaders of an operations-focused company sets the vision and mission of the culture, but sometimes will have the do as I say, not as I do approach. Sometimes their behavior is incongruent with what they want to achieve, often leaving the employees confused and less than motivated. On a people-first approach, the customer-focused company knows the importance of putting people first, specifically employees. They develop a culture of happy, engaged, and fulfilled employees that deliver a better customer experience. Customers like this and continue to come back. An operations-focused company develops a culture focused on systems, procedures, and the bottom line. And while this is important to any company's success, they miss the culture part of the equation. And finally, customer service. The customer-focused company looks at customer service as a philosophy to be embraced by every employee of the company, recognizing that there are both external and internal customers. The operations-focused company sees customer service as a department. Well, I hope you enjoyed this short lesson. Please be sure to visit my website, which is www.hyken.
Okay, Aruni and I are going to leave you with one last thought, which is don't forget to celebrate your successes. It's something that's so important. And what this does is it helps encourage learning and adapting. And for me personally, it's one of those things that I forget to do sometimes, and I don't think that's beneficial for my team. We need to learn how to really appreciate our successes. So anyway, you need to do it to incent the customer success mindset on your team and beyond, for ongoing motivation to keep your team going in the right direction. It's also key to building momentum, and we did talk about those early successes and the importance of celebrating those early successes, and just to make people feel good. And one of those things that comes along with that is unleashing that dopamine inside of people. And I think there's a
wanted to mention, Scott, just so you know, there's other supplementary information and links to articles that will come along with these modules, and there's a link to a really interesting article about dopamine release on making people feel good so they continue to contribute to the success of the company and the success of the customer.
And then people also want to be associated with success. So let them.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Scott. So we're now at the end of our presentation, and I want to summarize some key takeaways from what we just went through. So really want to emphasize that strong leadership is essential. You really need to have the right team in position to make this change a success. It's important to collect the right data and form proper insights for decision making. Customer communication is critical, making sure that you're properly communicating with the customer. Designing the user experience from all angles. Look at different ways that the customer interacts with your product. Make sure that you empower your team. Align your KPIs with your strategy. Build in those feedback systems that we talked about to make sure that what you're measuring is still appropriate. Get everyone involved. We showed you some videos on that and how to get everyone involved, and hire and grow customer-centric employees. It's important that you hire customer-focused people versus operationally focused people if you want to achieve success. And as Scott just talked about, celebrate your successes. And with that, we conclude Customer-Focused Differentiation in a Highly Competitive Marketplace, Part 2, Module 1, Building and Leading a Customer Experience Differentiation Culture. Thank you.
Thank you.